Okay, welcome to the third episode of the Collaboration Podcast. My name is Jonathan Kay, and I'm here with my co-host, Marco Masi. We are members of the Sri Aurobindo Association of America, an organization that produces the Collaboration Journal. Collaboration Journal is now in its 46th year of publication and is a journal dedicated to the evolutionary vision of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Collaboration examines the theory and practice of integral yoga, the place of humankind in the universe, and themes such as consciousness, emergence, and transformation. Articles, essays, poetry, and images explore the human impulse towards perfection and speculate on future possibilities as we move forward in a rapidly changing world.
So let's introduce our guest today, who is Patrick Beldio. Beldio or Beldio?
Beldio is how I typically do.
Not the Italian version.
Would it be the Italian would be Beldio?
Beldio.
Yes.
Beldio.
No, that's it. Yeah, you got it right.
Yeah. Okay. So Patrick Beldio is a professor of comparative theology and religion at Marymount University and George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Some of his areas of academic research and teaching are interreligious studies, comparative theology, Hindu-Christian relations, interfaith dialogue, religion and visual culture, religion and gender, with a focus on Franciscan spirituality, the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and the teachings of Meher Baba. He has been a student of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo since the early 1990s, and his current book project features the Mother and her contribution to integral yoga. Patrick is also a professional sculptor with a studio at the Franciscan Monastery in Washington, D.C. Yeah, so welcome on board, Patrick. And
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a list of questions here for you, but now it comes to my mind that perhaps a more personal introduction would be better in place. Can you explain us a bit about your personal spiritual path, how you got to Meher Baba, Sri Aurobindo, and I'm not asking you to tell us about your sadhana, but just how you got
sort of the history a little bit. Yeah, that's a fun thing. I'll be actually talking about this more in depth actually at the Gnostic Center in Delhi is going to be having a webinar on this very topic. So it's sort of fresh in my mind at the moment. I was formed in the Catholic Church actually here in the United States. Mother was Italian Catholic, father was sort of a mix. But grew up going to Mass, and it was a kind of daily part of our life, and approached it mainly through the arts. We were a musical family, and so my experience of the divine was very much always through the arts and music. And my mom encouraged me and my brother and sister to make art. So the arts were always sort of a part of my sadhana, you could say, even as a Catholic. And I went to I grew up in the South, mainly Colorado first and then North Carolina, but then ended up in a Catholic college, the University of Notre Dame, where I explored the mystical tradition of Catholicism, even explored becoming a priest in the Catholic Church for a little bit, and got a degree in sculpture. And from there went on to get a master's degree in fine arts and sculpture, a master's degree in Catholic theology. And then now later in life, I got a PhD in religious studies and culture sort of investigating the relationship between art, theology, spiritual practice, the creative process. And so that's a sort of very short version, but I found Sri Aurobindo at Notre Dame actually through a professor there who was telling me about Bede Griffiths, a Benedictine monk who was popular in the Christian ashram movement in India. And he wrote about Sri Aurobindo in such incredible terms that I felt like I had to read him for myself. This was around 1993. And I started to read Sri Aurobindo at that point and didn't really know about the mother until much later, but Aurobindo just really impressed me. It sort of was a time in my life where I was seeking for something more than just a religious perspective or just the Catholic perspective, but wanted to widen even more and make my Catholicism more Catholic, I guess you could say. I don't ever feel like I left my Catholic faith. I just sort of expanded. And so Aurobindo was part of that. And then later, I discovered Meher Baba through followers of his. I moved to Washington, D.C. to go to graduate school to do my master's in fine arts and theology. And while I was here, I met someone who's a part of a Sufi community that Meher Baba founded in 1952. And I sort of was reading about Sufism as well as Aurobindo at that time. And was making art inspired by all of these sources. And so the more I got to know this Sufi community, it's called Sufism Reoriented, the more I was intrigued by it. And that's a whole series that included dreams that were very powerful, that Meher Baba came to me, the Murshid or the spiritual teacher of Sufism came to me. And actually even later, Sri Aurobindo and the mother were also a part of those dreams. So for me, the inner experience of dreams and art, music, academic study, and pilgrimage, I guess, around the United States were a part of my sadhana that got me here.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I could go forever, so I'll end there.
Thanks for sharing all of that. Yeah, we can get into maybe more of the experiences that your life has led you to in the conversation. But I think for now, I'd like to just introduce our listeners to the collaboration edition that you have published an article in. So yes. Here we go. This is the Crisis and Emergence. It's from spring 2022. And you have a feature article called The Time Has Come. I also noticed that, which we'll get to a bit later after we talk about the article, but you do there's a picture of one of your sculptures.
Yes,
here as well.
That's the joie de vivre.
Beautiful. So maybe we can start with just kind of opening up a little bit and unpacking more of what you presented in your article. I think that even before getting to the content, I think that if you could just speak a little bit in a more broad sense about the theme of this collaboration, Crisis and Emergence.
Sure.
Just to kind of situate us to how you're approaching those terms. And I think that the article obviously is going to go into help give us a clue to how you're actively participating in what we can probably say is a time of crisis, but also of emergence.
Yeah, I think we all feel that both crisis and emergence at the same time, and I approached the article, I guess, by trying to hold both realities at the same time. And I actually didn't do that at first. When I started to write the article, I focused really on, I think I sort of was focusing on the opportunity, the positive, the light part of it more than I did. And I realized, oh gosh, I mean, things are so crazy now. I really need to address the crisis part. And as I was going back into the things that Mother was saying, that Sri Aurobindo is saying about their experience in the very early on, from the 1920s all the way to the Mother's passing of 1973, that, increasingly the Mother described how both things were happening in her body. The fact that it was a terribly ruinous experience, bizarre, at the same time wonderful. And I guess I wanted to try to sort of hold those things together, I guess broadly. I don't know if that addresses your question, but that's sort of how I approached it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I next wanted to ask about this, the first part of your article. You get into using information that's from the Gapminder Foundation.
Yeah, Gapminder.
Gapminder,
Yeah.
sorry. Gapminder Foundation. And it just, I think one of the aspects that you bring up is that it is interesting in a time where we can identify serious, physical, like existential crisis that we can track, through humanity around the world, and people can resonate with certain experiences in their own personal life, but how not to kind of become too bogged down by how that seems like all the negative things are being kind of privileged or foregrounded, and how that can really lead to a sort of an unbalanced worldview. And I think that's really important. And so maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, how you're using the Gapminder Foundation, and also maybe get into, you mentioned at the end of that section, the 10 dramatic instincts, which would be the ways in which the ways in which sort of maybe subconsciously, unconsciously, we kind of are synthesize a worldview, but based on these habits that are kind of going to be bringing out maybe more of the crisis rather than the emergence.
Yes, I think that's what, because I'm so aware, like you said, of just how foregrounding people are making the bad news, that it's hard to see through the forest of all of that, the emergence of something new that is actually happening, that is measurable, and that is actually visible with our senses. We don't even have to be spiritually inclined or sensitive to see some of these things. And I used the gapminder.org website, and actually became familiar with his work on TED Talk that the founder had given many years ago. He's since passed, unfortunately, but because he passed kind of young. But Hans Rosling gave these talks on, Don't Panic, was the name of these movies that, or these talks that he gave, that the world is actually getting better in all of these incredible ways. And let me just tell you, I'm going to use statistics. He goes, wait, don't turn the channel. I know statistics might not be very interesting to you, but actually there's this incredible story going on that talks about the population growth, poverty decline, the fact that we've reached peak child, the fact that every country actually is now on average having 2 children per family instead of 6 or 7, and then most of them dying before they reach age to have families of their own. So we're now living in harmony with nature instead of dying in harmony with nature. Of course, there is the climate crisis. Of course, that's a real threat, and he wasn't ignoring that. But he did say that we have the capacity to address it. And even, I don't know, I didn't write about this, but he talked a lot about how Al Gore would be in touch with him to talk about the work he was doing, and he tried to convince Hans Rosling to be more doomsday, I guess, in his approach. And Hans is like, well, no, because it's actually we have the capacity. There are really good things going on. I would prefer if we emphasize the positive as well as the negative in hand, and sort of with that notion, and we could collaborate with more people to address these problems together, because we are in it together. And anyway, they sort of parted ways because Al Gore just wanted to be more kind of crying wolf, I think, about the situation. And Hans Rosling was basically saying, no, there's really good news that we need to build on. Otherwise, we build what he called a dramatic worldview, or over dramatic worldview, and it increases worry, and then that increases the possibility of making terrible decisions. So he also wrote a book called Factfulness that is based on this idea of a fact-based worldview. So using facts that we have at hand to construct a worldview, how things are actually happening on the ground, that would give us also good resources to make decisions, policy decisions at all the local levels, state and national and international levels, so that we make decisions that don't make the problems worse, but also build on things that are making things better. So I was really struck by that. And I was also sensitive to this because my own Murshida, my teacher in Sufism, is very strong about how she's teaching her Sufi students to be aware of these good things, to not be turned by the bad news of the day, or the news that's, you know, that's making money for newspapers and even academics who don't have an understanding of this good news. Because Hans Rosling's website, gapminder.com, is mainly there to test people's knowledge about what's going on in the world. And he says even academic people who would be in the know, they tend to flunk the tests that they give there about the state of the world. And so I've been using them in class too to teach my students. So I have them take these tests, and they are constantly, you know, they'll get, the questions have to do with, you know, what is the rate of education for girls in the world versus boys, for instance, and they'll always guess that it's worse than boys, or terrible, even worse than it actually is. And the actual answer is that most girls are getting the same sort of education as boys in the world. It's a little bit less, but it's not like significantly less. So things like that are really important to build on, making sure that we have a worldview that leads to building a better world instead of making it worse by the decisions we might make. So I think that answers your question, but what was it that you asked again?
Yeah, that was fantastic. No, just like asking a little bit about that perspective that you're using in your article, and
yeah.
I mean, we could also I looked it up on you provided a citation for the 10 dramatic instincts from that website, and that's the website you're speaking about, which is really, I think, trying to help people. I think, yeah, through factfulness, right, is the perspective, and really, I guess, trying to, I mean, in a follow-up question, I guess, then would be trying to find that edge between, you know, knowing that something needs to change, but not being fearful, not acting out of a place of fear, because you're saying making bad decisions. And I think, yeah, when certain elements and any kind of a problematic are kind of foregrounded, especially if they're forced into the foreground through like modern media, for instance, or whatever kind of algorithms you are on your Facebook, or you're scrolling, things are going to be forced, and that's going to be kind of woven into more of the foreground of your reality. But I think that just sort of what you're speaking to is really asking the question, what kind of activates and motivates transformation of consciousness, you know? And I think that, yes, from a place of fear, from a place of the world out there is scary because like the doomsday approach, I think it can lead to, you know, it can lead to shutting down and kind of saying, well, I've got to protect myself, which is kind of going to inflate and exacerbate the kind of the neoliberal disposition that we have to sort of try to also break through to try to form communities in a deeper sense, and not kind of retract into our own consumeristic little bubbles. So I think that you're bringing up something that's really important, and I just wanted to maybe follow up on that and ask you about that. How do we start to find that place, that an inner motivation, like like I would say a spiritual ground that can motivate change, rather than a negative reinforcement, kind of like almost like the disciplinary sense of like the world's going to end, I need to, the government or certain media outlets need to discipline you into changing. It's not going to change consciousness so much, is it?
No. Yes, I think, and I guess in my article, I talk about the fact that it's important to do, I guess, two things. First is to become educated about what's actually happening on the ground. There's a mental strengthening that needs to happen. Sri Aurobindo talked about the manas and the buddhi, the manas being the sense mind, the buddhi being the rational mind. That the mass of humanity has sort of, we're in this stuck in the manas, we're sort of stuck in the sense mind that we have evolved over, you know, millennia. And the Gapminder talks about the 10 sort of oppositions to mental growth that we need to really, I think, tackle. Different instincts that we have that keep us fearful, that keep us bogged down. And so I think there's a mental work that needs to be done. We need to become more educated, and we need to be and not just like degrees, but to know that there are sort of instincts that are ruling our mind that we need to understand and then learn how to manage. And there's also, that's sort of like the mental part of it, but I also think what's more important still is what the Mother and Sri Aurobindo are talking about, Meher Baba and others, that there's a new age, this new age that is dawning, they call the age of intuition. I mean, Vivekananda talked about it, Sri Ramakrishna talked about it, Meher Baba, of course, Mother and Sri Aurobindo, that the mind is not going to take us forward into this new age. It's just not, it wasn't designed to do that. And whether or not it can be transformed or it needs to be annihilated is the question. And that's actually something in my book that we can talk about. But Meher Baba talked about it, the need for the mind to be annihilated, actually. And in Sanskrit, it's called manonasha. And he has a whole sort of teaching about it. And you can actually, and part of my book is talking about the history of manonasha and in Sanskrit texts and how it's been brought forward into the 20th century by different figures. But there is this spiritual practice that needs to be addressed, or in which we are able to, in our personal lives, to go from the mind to the heart, from the mind to the supermind, eventually. That there's this transition that we're going through that we can, I think, through yoga, through some sort of sadhana, we can help manifest in our own personal lives and then broadly in a communal context. And I think, as an artist, it's been easy for me to plug into a creative process where that transformation is hooked to a creative practice, that the spiritual practice and the creative practice is really important, has been important to me personally. But I think it can be important to most people, whether it's, learning how to do something like music or visual arts or dance, moving your body. It doesn't actually matter. It just seems to me opening oneself up to beauty, no matter how one might do that. It could be hiking and be getting into the natural world. I also think using your spiritual practice to connect to the earth instead of unconnecting is really key to going forward, because the yogas of the past, of course, have been all about very much an ascendant sort of practice, an ascendant spirituality, and that's been very rational because it's been difficult to transform matter into something better than it is. But we have seen, and I think Gapminder is telling us, that the world is changing, matter is becoming more pliable, more plastic. There's opportunities for growth we have never had before. There's more inclusion of all sorts. So matter is changing, and I think if we can hook ourselves into the ways in which it's changing, and no matter how we might want to do that, through science and technology, through art and creativity, all of those things are like opportunities for us to use as tools to increase our spiritual practice, instead of denying those things as not being a part of our spiritual practice. So
Yeah, I like this very much, that you make this connection between spiritual practice, arts, and our everyday life and our activities, not just seen as a work. And because Sri Aurobindo was also speaking about the divine works, no? But we should not interpret these works as for a job. I mean, for making a living. No? Works to prepare the subjective age, what Sri Aurobindo calls the subjective age. This transitional state of humanity, which is still not the gnostic beings, the supramentalized species, but makes a step forwards into this spiritual direction. And I like also very much your expression, age of intuition. I will take this for my next book or chapter or title or something, because I think this is exactly captures what we need today. And you do it with arts, with art theology and sculpture. No, music, not. I don't know. Also music.
I do. Yes, okay. I sing.
Yeah.
I sing. Yes.
Okay, so you do it from one side. I do it more on the scientific, from the scientific perspective, and this finds a bit more resistance because people say, oh no, this is very mental, this is a sense mind, as you say. It's not true. It's not true. You can also practice a scientific you can practice a science also using your intuition.
Yes.
Yeah, and a little technical detail, or no, not technical detail, but question, because since we are now speaking about people who are intuitive and should go beyond this technical point of view of looking at the world, I don't know if you know Steven Pinker, who is a psychologist.
Yes. He's a part of the Gapminders resource.
That's why. So, because I was reading your article and said, this is Steven Pinker. It's very similar, something, not all, of course, because he instead
he concentrates on violence, yes, and other things.
Yeah, but he also makes this reasoning that he says we are focusing too much on the negative aspects. And look here, and he has written a book on all the facts that there's less violence, less wars, less famines, and all the things, positive things that we tend not to see. But he comes from the other perspective. He said, so I would like to know how, because you say we should take the spiritual perspective, but he is one of the most notorious materialists and atheists who says we should return back to the age of enlightenment, which means substantially the manas,
I think Buddhi, yes.
The Buddhi, no? And the sense mind point of view. So how would you answer to him, or would you agree, or how would you see it?
I think it's part of the initial. I sort of said there's kind of two parts. I think that one needs to strengthen the mind. One needs to become, the manas and the buddhi both need to be strengthened in this time. But to also understand that that is not enough. That we can strengthen it as much as we want and make it perfect, even, or make it as genius as Sri Aurobindo, though that would be hard to do. He was such a genius, but I mean, he proves that the mind is capable of incredible, just knowledge and expression of knowledge. If you just read any of his books, in the totality you take together. But he, at the end of his life, he couldn't write anymore from that level. He told the mother, the only thing I can really write these days is Savitri. Because the poetry is where I live. And he says, I can't go down to that mental level anymore. And it wasn't because the new world that he was being a part of and building didn't allow for those sorts of dualistic, this is right, this is wrong, yes and no. So I would say that Steven Pinker, I wouldn't even try to, I guess, say that one needs to convert to a spiritual perspective. It seems to me that we're in a transition now and we need to strengthen everything. And so if his desire is to strengthen the mind as he's doing and doing well, and I think, advocating for the best of the Enlightenment period, then that's good. That needs to go forward, because there are so many forces that would like to sabotage the Enlightenment gains that we have made and emphasize the darkness and the colonialism and I don't know. I mean, the things we've used the mind to do to get to a point where we almost might blow ourselves up, But that Steven Pinker, I think, is wanting to take forward the good and remind us that the Enlightenment gave us something, and that the Western civilizations have given us something that we shouldn't look down on. This is part of my research too, is I feel that there's a kind of a misunderstanding that we don't want to essentialize the West or essentialize the East as being material and spiritual, but there is a history of the West of mastering matter that needs to be there and acknowledged and also honored, that it was in the West that we learned to split the atom and map the genome, and it was in the East that they mapped subtle body and the mental body and how that grows through reincarnation or rebirth and karma. That didn't happen in the West. And I think both of those things are divine things. And I guess in Mayor Baba's teaching, and also Mershida Connor's, my teacher, she really emphasizes this fact that we really need to understand that both arcs of learning, the West and the East, have been crucial to get us to this point. That the West is a mastery of matter, there are examples of mastery of spirit in the West, but the trajectory, the trend has been matter, and the focus on consciousness sort of focused outward to matter. Whereas in the East, the consciousness has been more directed inward and up to spirit, and that has yielded incredible products of spiritual mastery that we can all as a species benefit from, and we are, And so it doesn't make sense to sort of have that split anymore, but we can see the history of that has gotten us to this point. And it's on those two arcs of learning that the integral yoga and the Sufi path that I belong to is very similar. There's a spirituality of descent that is taking both material mastery and spiritual mastery as a foundation to build something completely new. That's neither material, neither spiritual, but something completely new. And so I would say, Steven Pinker is wonderful in strengthening the material mastery and our understanding of that. Whereas someone like Ramana Maharshi, who was completely sort of against, thought of the body as a disease and we need to get out of it eventually. But his spiritual mastery is there and is unmistakable. And so what we can learn from him is unmistakable in my mind too. And so both of those things are there.
Yeah, we have to learn to become integral, and that's the point.
And that's it. Yeah.
We have to.
That's what the supermind
all the
is.
things, put it together, and that's a hard.
It's hard. Yeah, I mean, we're all struggling.
Yeah. And in this sense, it comes to my mind what you said before about your master. I understood that your master was a Sufi master.
Yes.
That's right, yeah. And he taught you to look always at the positive things,
or to not to forget them. And she would not say
not
deny the negative.
Them. Yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah.
But here again, like Steven Pinker, a counter example comes to my mind. You certainly know Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. I don't know how to pronounce him correctly. There's a complicated name, Llewellyn Vaughan Lee or something like that. He's a Sufi master, and probably I'm pronouncing him not correctly. And
I don't know.
Yeah, and he takes, okay, if you don't know it, then it doesn't matter. But he takes a quite negative stance, and says, but he has also this point that the dark side, that's my words, but I'm rephrasing somehow, the dark side helps us to get in contact to reality as well and to learn from it. And I found this a bit on your here. There's something is almost quite
that's right.
Disturbing what I read here in your article. Let me read it here again. In a similar understanding, in what Meher Baba called the law of reaction, he would often create opposition to his own spiritual work based on his principle. In other words, he would strategically invite or even author something evil to
in quotations.
happen. Yeah, in quotations, exactly. To happen because he viewed it as a precious energy needed to achieve his desired outcome. So my question might be, are we not going a bit too far here? Is there not sufficient negativity for itself? Should we even invite it?
Right. No, I think he would never ask his followers to invite it. I think as a spiritual master, they are masters because they can handle it. I don't think he would ask his students to invite evil or opposition of any sort. It's sort of that he would say, it's going to come, actually. The fact that you're supporting my work just puts you in the bullseye of the asuric forces or the negative hostile forces that are there. And you're just going to have to know that that's going to be part of the work, which is sort of proof of why yogas of the past didn't want to deal with matter and wanted to get out of it, because the reaction against transformation is so strong. And I think we're living in a time where we're seeing, you know, the supramental forces that can be called supramental forces are awakening hostile forces against it, because, you know, it's been, you know, the universe has gone along just fine, thank you very much, without these supramental forces, and we would not like them to disrupt the structure and the flow and the process that's been established. And I mean, I think of the Tiki Torch guys down in when was it, in Charlottesville, Virginia, when they were saying the Jews will not replace us. You know, they're yelling. Do you remember this? The demonstration. This was back in 2018 when there was, you know, basically the rise of white nationalism was happening under Trump, and there's the big sort of rally that happened in Virginia, in Charlottesville, Virginia. I can't remember the context anyway, but their chant was, "They will not replace us," which is the chant of any established force that knows it's going to be replaced by something new. And I think the rise of white nationalism is an example of that, where it knows that the future is looking very different than the past. We're going to live in the United States, for instance, in which the white population is going to become a minority. And the feeling of that is what I think people feel, and they are reacting against this more inclusive future that is just manifesting. And there's very good reason to not fear, but the sort of reptilian brain reacts and says, no, you will not replace us. And I feel like, so Meher Baba was just sort of describing this law of reaction that is there in nature. You can see it. He talked about it in terms of, you can even see it in nature when weeds that are growing next to beautiful flowers will be there to oppose the growth of the beautiful flower, but that strengthens the flower's growth to the extent that it reaches for the sun and grows beyond the height of the weed. You can see it, he said, you know, you can see it in barbarous cultures that threaten the life of a civilized culture. That the civilized culture has to demonstrate its civilization, you know, its kind of higher knowing, by dealing with, in the way that they deal with a barbarous nation or something. You know, it's like we have to strengthen those things. Well, those things are strengthened in that contest. The mother recognized that too, and that's what I write about in this article. And she said, you know, oppositions and contraries stimulate progress. And she was commenting on Sri Aurobindo's aphorisms that talk about this issue, and I can look at my paper where she was talking about it, but it's sort of, they're very puzzling aphorisms that Sri Aurobindo give that basically, you know, get to your point, which aren't we going too far? Because he's saying, would you get rid of death? Because death, if you get rid of death, then you'll kill life. You can't get rid of death. You can only transform death into a greater living. That's kind of my paraphrase of the aphorism. And he said that the same of cruelty, the same of ignorance, that you can't get rid of these negative things, but you can transform them into something greater. And that greater thing was achieved because of the contest between the two opposites. And so you can't get immortal life in a body on earth unless there's a contest between death and life as it's always been. You can't get to greater love, you know, without cruelty coming up against love as it's always been. And so that's kind of the mother's, you know, she summed it up and said, you know, oppositions and contraries are a stimulus to progressive growth. And I think that's really key. I just can't, the more I've meditated on this, the more I feel like it's the key to the integral yoga, the key to any way forward in life. And if we don't understand that principle and understand it well, we're not going to be able to negotiate the forces that are coming at us, and they're coming at us hard. And so we've got to be wise as, serpents, innocent as doves, as Jesus would have said. But I think knowing that principle helps us to be wise and to then make individually choices that are going to get us to that next level, personally and collectively.
Yeah, very well said. That was really, I think at this point, bringing in the flower-based worldview is really, I feel that coming. There's a section here I'd like to read from the mother that you quoted in here from her questions and answers. So I'll just read it first.
Sure.
When the sun sets and all that becomes silent, sit down for a moment and put yourself in communion with nature. You will feel rising from the earth, from below the roots of the trees and mounting upward and coursing through their fibers up to the highest outstretching branches, the aspiration of an intense love and longing, a longing for something that brings light and gives happiness, for the light that is gone and they wish to have it back again. There is a yearning so pure and intense that if you can feel the movement in the trees, your own being too will go up in an ardent prayer for the peace and light and love that are unmanifested here. And I just had that passage open when you were speaking, and I think that it really brings out that really articulates so beautifully this kind of the aspiration that I think you were really speaking to in what you just spoke about. Right. And it's I think it's really interesting because we were speaking about how the older types of yoga, for instance, is kind of ascending, going in and up or in and out, for instance. But there's something about that being immanent in the body, in and finding how that goes into the earth, from the earth, and bringing back into from finding that aspiration, finding the power from within rather than trying to find it without and then pulling it in or being given in, and so I think that in terms of these kind of polarities, that the good and evil or the adverse forces and the definitely from the tension that's created, we find ways forward. But I think that what the mother is speaking about, and really central to the integral yoga, is really having an aspiration that is going to allow you to not succumb to either one completely, which is really an integral consciousness. Be able to hold both at the same time, use them creatively to find out how their collision or their engagement can actually propel transformation, right?
Wow.
And so that idea of like, I just think it's so beautiful, and it's really helpful for me at my time, or at the time in my life, is to really look to the non-human in a way, the plant world, to really, what the mother's saying is that you can feel an aspiration that is beyond a mental aspiration, it's beyond a mental surrender. It's really it's the yoga of nature, which is really, we can open to that. We are that, but we can realize that again, or we can remember that, or we can, all the different ways that she may have articulated that. But I just wanted to maybe ask you about, to respond to that, and maybe to speak a little bit about how you brought in the flower-based worldview.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think it's a privilege, isn't it, to be able to be conscious of that feeling, because I think we're all in the midst of this as a human species, and with all the other species, that we are feeling this aspiration, and we misdiagnose it, and we think this aspiration is something uncomfortable and it's wrong and we shouldn't have it, and so we kind of push it down. But I think Mother is saying, no, trust it. Trust your own intuition, trust your own feelings. And you can learn to gain more trust if you can sit quietly with nature, as you beautifully read there, that it's happening not just in you, but it's happening in these plants, that there's consciousness in these beings. They're not dead, they're alive, and they're alive just like you are, and they can be a friend. You know, the Native Americans know this. I mean, they don't call trees and plants and animals objects. They're people. They're all people, and they have souls that would like very much to be in relationship to us and be intimate with us. And so this flower-based worldview is really the mother's sort of, I don't know, you could say her Native American manifesto, I'm saying that, but I mean, her work with flowers, as I talk about in there, so people know about it. It's wonderful, but I think it's so crucial to going forward that if we can understand flowers are people, that they have consciousness, they have souls, they have something to teach us. And she just demonstrated that by naming almost 900 of them throughout her life, naming them based on what sort of energy, what sort of vibration, sort of blends of divine forces were in them that manifested in their colors, the shape, even their medicinal qualities, their fragrance. All of those things are detailed and specific, and they manifest something specific about the divine. And if we can learn the language of that, we can move forward, I think, in a way to get in touch with our own supermind, our own intuition, our own, this higher faculties than the mind that will help us go forward. So the plants, the flower-based worldview was my way in this article to talk about those issues, to go from an over-dramatic worldview to a fact-based worldview to a flower-based worldview. It's just my way of saying of moving from the old age to a new age, an old life to a new life, one in which we're manifesting something completely new, and that it's beyond our imagination what that is. And it's an adventure to find out, and we're finding out little by little. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I think also these things that you are saying now about flowers, it's also science is discovering this thing, this aspect, that flowers, flower or plants, the vegetal life in general, they are discovering some form of consciousness. They don't know how to call it, because consciousness is a word that is somehow indefinable. Then they speak of a basal cognition, and they see that these flowers have some form of understanding of the world. They perceive something, or it looks like as if, and then the materialist comes in and says we should not anthropomorphize, and it's here that comes the damping down, where people then say no, we should not listen to our intuition at the end. But but it is coming up, this thing. It's very interesting to see how it will end. But I would like to connect to another thing now, because you have a very flower-based culture. You're an artist. You like, also in a certain sense, botanist, I would say, even not
not a green thumb.
Okay, but you have this flower-based touch and understanding of life, and you have had a Sufi master. You have a Christian background. And you talk a lot about Meher Baba, Sri Aurobindo. Isn't it too much? This too a lot of things. How do you bring these things together? So, in some sense, the question would be also, how do you connect the teachings of Meher Baba and Sri Aurobindo? And by the way, if you can briefly, also if only superficially, introduce me at least, because I don't know much about this master. So speak about Meher Baba, and then create a bridge between him and Sri Aurobindo and Mother?
Big questions. Well, first, how do I keep this together? And then I'll talk about Meher Baba. For me, it's always been the arts that kept all of these things together. For me, it was always being inspired and not being afraid to be inspired by different sources. And so my artwork was always an expression of my sadhana, or was my sadhana. And so it was a natural thing for me to just look for inspiration anywhere. And so, whether it was Catholicism and mysticism in Catholicism, and that was mainly Francis of Assisi, and why the Italian language also is important to me. We've talked about that, and Clare of Assisi. But then Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and the Hindu tradition and yoga tradition that he's rooted in more. Of course, she's rooted in the Western esoteric traditions. But then Sufism and Meher Baba was another branch. But all of those things were just sort of feeding my soul and my creative process. So that's kind of what. But then when I found Meher Baba in Sufism, I would say my home tradition, though I don't feel like it's a home exclusively, would be Sufism. And it's from there that these other spokes of the wheel, you could say, radiate. Because my teacher, all the murshids that have been the teachers of this Sufi order have explicitly talked about Aurobindo and the Mother as being crucially important to understand their teaching. They rely on it a lot and pair it with our Sufi teaching, because there aren't very many people in the world saying that there's a descent of something divine coming down into the earth and transforming it. There aren't very many people saying that. There aren't very many people talking about a spirituality that would respond to that descent and make that both a material and a spiritual mastery at the same time. So that's very explicit in our Sufi practice. So that's kind of the integrating thread for me, or the integrating tradition, is the Sufi path, but also my creative practice. Who Meher Baba is, I get into this in my book. The introduction is going to be sort of about explaining how is this guy who's a Sufi practitioner and a follower of Meher Baba talking about integral yoga, Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So I have a whole chapter on this, but basically, Meher Baba was a contemporary of the Mother. He was born in 1894, died in 1969. And he talked about very similar things. Instead of saying it's a supramental descent, he taught, he was silent for most of his life. And he said that eventually he would be able to break his silence. And when he broke his silence, the force of that would come and rain down on the earth and transform the earth. So it's a different kind of imagery and symbol, but the same idea was there. And if you track his work, what he was doing with people, with technology, with animals, with Western people versus Eastern people, his travels, he was traveling all over the world. You can sort of see this incredible resonance going on with what he was doing and what Mother and Sri Aurobindo were doing. Mainly Mother, because Sri Aurobindo, passed away in 1950. And after 1950, 1956 happened, the Golden Day happened. The Mother claimed, that she had a golden hammer and broke the golden door, and the golden rain came down, the golden force. There's things going on at the same time that Meher Baba was doing, talking about the breaking of his silence. It's the same idea. So one can study, and my research, my scholarship has to do with sort of pairing these things. But Sri Aurobindo and the Mother didn't really know about Meher Baba. There are conversations that Aurobindo had with his disciples in 1938, after he broke his, was it his leg? He was able, it was the first time that he was able to be in conversation face to face with his students. Some of his students were there helping him medically and stuff, and he was having all these wonderful conversations, and Meher Baba's name came up, and one of the disciples didn't really know a lot about him, but what he knew was sort of cursory, and sort of making fun of Meher Baba because he was silent. He was a Zoroastrian who thought he was God, anyway, the more they explained about him, Aurobindo didn't really have an opinion. He said, well, he seems like he's on the overmind. Maybe he's sort of, because he changes his mind all the time. And so he can be someone who would like make plans and then he would change his plans. So there isn't a lot of knowledge that Aurobindo had about him, but Meher Baba was very aware of him and just loved him very much and thought his work was very important. And again, like I say, since Meher Baba founded Sufism in 1952, the murshids of that order have been very clear about Aurobindo and the Mother's value to the New Age and why they're masters of this New Age, and they need to be understood and studied as a part of our own curriculum as Sufi students. So there's much more to be said, but that's kind of the background.
Yeah, that's really really helpful background. I remember learning a little bit about that when we first met at CIS.
Yeah,
I wanted to it is very interesting because it's how like this idea of an interreligious spirituality in a way, like there's like how these things are crossing over, influencing each other, and kind of helping each other too. I think that one of the things about one of the differences between religion and spirituality is that there's a lot more of a there's a lot more porousness in terms of how things can come together. For instance, in my background of being let's say an Indian raga musician, North Indian raga musician, it was very interesting because in India there was a lot of religious separation in terms of the doctrine and in terms of even culturally how that manifested itself into space, and how Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims were in India all coexisting together. But at the same time, religion is very much going to say, well, this is the other, this is us, this is the other. But in terms of the maestros of raga music, there was Muslim singers singing about Krishna, there was Hindu singers singing about Allah, and it was like at a level of the arts, it seemed to be very spiritual. And even though some of these maestros, and there are examples of Orthodox religious maestros as well, but I'm speaking of the ones that were sort of like playing in the difference between them and in how they could kind of flow together and sort of you could say amplify each other. That's the feeling that I got. And so I think that I just wanted to comment a little bit on your path as being unique in that sense, and also transdisciplinary. We spoke a little bit in your introduction about how you have, Marco asked, how do you keep it all together? There's so many different disciplines at work. There's so many different types of religious containers at work. There's so many different spiritualities, but I think that one of the big questions I have to myself and to just in the world is, what does the integral look like? And it looks radically different to different people, but I think that that's really that integration point, I think, is really it seems to be something that you are very much in the middle of. You've kind of found some kind of a balance, which I think you articulated so beautifully, speaking about how art did that for you. And I have to say that this is really, I mean, it's almost like you took the words out of my being, in the sense like you looked and drew inspiration from what resonates with you, what makes you come alive, what makes you want to sculpt or want to sing, and what kind of barrier can keep you from being activated, And so I think that through the lens of art or creativity or that discipline, that makes a lot of sense for me. And I think that speaks to what Debashish Banerjee, my PhD mentor at CIS, but he would call the integrative impulse. And I also found that, I spoke about that in the Indian lineage, and I would be in North Indian music, but in jazz is right from the very beginning. I find it contains, and the way that I learned it, again, for me, but it contains an integrative impulse. It wants to interact with, it wants to fold in and become one with the other, with the outside. And I think that's been a really big part of how I pursue the arts, but also spirituality, and I think when I came in contact with Sri Aurobindo's writings, it was so musical to me. It felt like music. I was reading music that I was I was I was being, and I was playing, and I was listening to. But that's just, cool. I just a little bit about that idea of the integrative impulse, and what does the integral look like to different people. And so, yeah, I just maybe
beautifully said.
You could respond to that. And one other question I had was just getting more specifically into the role of art in your sadhana, which, you know, we've talked about. Maybe I've said in my case that is kind of the integral point in a way that helps me kind of find inspiration and be able to express and to work with those energies, to be activated, to bring whatever's activating me into, you know, into the world. And I wanted to ask you about the relation between aspiration and expression, because we spoke about, let's say, the purity of aspiration of the flowers, of the organic life, you know, from the mother. And I just thought that there was something there in terms of, in general, like there's an aspiration for something that is beyond words, beyond the mind, but that's a feeling. And I wanted to just to speak a little bit how that relates to expression in your case, how you've worked on the relationship.
Oh, yeah. So there's two. The first one had to do with just responding to that integration point. Yeah, which I love. Of course, we both love Banerjee. I'm a big fan of his, and I think he's doing such important work. Let's see. Well, I think you just put your thumb on it. I think we are going through a time in which the integration point is going to be different for different people, and we have to be courageous enough to follow that in ourselves, and just be courageous enough to name it, make it more conscious, and follow it, and then express it. And for me, of course, we were talking to me or focusing on me at this point, but I mean, it's been through the arts and our academia and all of these different religious traditions or spiritual paths, and I think that point, I think Meher Baba's silence for me is what integrates it the most, I guess, or a way to talk about it. I think the silence is what's so important. I even see the notion of the silence in the mother's work, and when I read Sri Aurobindo, of course. I think when you sort of, I mean, they talk about when you, I mean, I don't know if I can say that I've experienced this, but beyond the supermind is Satchidananda, which I think one can say that's the realm of silence. There is no expression, there's no form, it's the formless. But the supermind, the supramental planes are what is able to translate that silence into form, and that silence into sound, I guess, and formlessness into form. And but that silence is manifesting here. It's sort of like putting that which is not manifestable, or that which is formless, making that into a form. And what does that mean? You know, how does that happen? And I think that's the work, and it's going to look different for everybody, and it's going to be experienced differently by different people. And so I guess that's what I would say. And I love how Debashish talks about, you know, we're going to have a spiritual practice that's going to draw on different things that are just going to be helpful for whoever we are at that point in our life, and it might change too. I see that, you know, the mother was talking about that as she was going through in the mother's agenda. When you read her experience of the supramental forces in the agenda, it's like she's getting pummeled, and it's really terrible and wonderful at the same time. And she has to do different things at different times to adjust and to integrate and to somehow manage to stay alive, because they were threatening her life, really, these forces. They're very powerful. And so it changes with the person too. You don't sort of have one practice at this point in your life and that's going to be the rest of your life. It actually, maybe bhakti at this point, maybe jnana at this point, maybe karma yoga at this point. You know, I'm just giving examples. It could be many different ways. Tantra, you know, it could be music, it could be. And so that kind of gets into my own personal experience. From 2007 to 2017, essentially, a 10-year period there, that's when I got my PhD. I graduated in 2016, actually. But I was also at the same time making a sculpture called The New Being for our sanctuary, our Sufi sanctuary in Walnut Creek, California. I started that project at the same time as I started my PhD program. And at the end of that process, I was spent. Could not get off the floor. And I feel like really only now I'm getting off the floor, teaching, writing again, but I have not been able to make art very much. I have my studio, I'm in my studio at the moment, but I've sort of focused my energies on writing my book, and the creative energies are now coming through the book project. And I have all my tools, and I have the sculptures and stuff that are around me, and behind me there's another one of the Nataraj. But right now I don't feel able to, the energy is not coming out through the hands at the moment. I think it's hibernating. I think in the future that the art will come back, but there's been sort of a mononash that happened, a mini mononash of my sculptural mind that has been replaced by a new mind of academic work and scholarship, teaching, that I'm loving so much. And I'm sharing my work, but in another way. And I'm loving that very much. But it was disorienting and really hard at first. I thought I really did feel like I was dying. And I was convinced that I was going to die. Like at the end of the project of the New Being project, I was in the foundry, living at the foundry at the time. This is a 40-foot tall sculpture, so that's why it took so long. And I was living at the foundry, and there was a lot of opposition, actually. Talking about opposition fueling growth, that's what was happening. And I was dealing with that principle on a personal level through the creative process. And I thought I couldn't make it. I was going to be like Moses, where you lead the people to the promised land, but you die before you get there. I was going to sort of finish the sculpture, but I wasn't going to survive when we installed it. And I didn't understand that. It was like, it wasn't a rational or emotional feeling. It was actually deep in my cells. It felt like I was going to die. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Black Swan with about the dance, and she dies at the end, or you're not sure if she dies at the end. She gives her best performance, and then she falls off the stage, and you don't know if she dies. And I thought when I saw the movie, this is when it first came out, I didn't understand that. I didn't like it. I thought, how ridiculous that an artist would give their best and they would die at the end. I mean, I'm an artist and I want to give my best, but I don't want to die at the end. And yet my aspiration was to give my best. I had that. That's what I followed, I guess, as an artist. It was like, I want to make the best sculpture I can make in honor of the divine. That was sort of my aspiration. And that's what I think the mother's talking about. That's what's inside of a flower. Their aspiration for the sun comes deep from the roots, and they want to manifest that as a flower, and that blossom is that production, that product. And for me, the sculpture of the New Being was my masterpiece, and I understood. I can see why one would die at the end of it, because you give everything to make that happen. And there's a period of postpartum depression, I guess, that I went through, but that it has stages, and actually my father passed away in the midst of this, and that was a big kind of key moment of me sort of going deep into the death, but also coming out of it, and revisiting my Catholic heritage and my family and stuff like that. That has led to the stage I'm in now, which is, like what I say, kind of the creativity is coming through the writing of my book project now.
Is this the sculpture? Yes.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
This is wonderful. Yeah. When I saw this, I said it expresses an aspiration towards the light, towards something that goes beyond. Yeah.
And then just to be clear, this is on page 3 of the collaboration. The spring.
Yeah, that's right. And you can see there's a video of it because there's much more. The figures coming out of all of the evolutionary forms that are at the base of the sculpture, and there's butterflies sort of exploding out of the chest and out of the head and going. They're made of clear acrylic, going up above and out and down. So that's all there too. It sort of tells the story, I think, of Savitri. For me, it was sort of sculpting that.
But what you are saying is, I think, quite typical in not only in artists, in scientists, in every type of human, how do you say, human expression. When you say you have these moments where you don't feel any longer creative, and this, you have still something, the power is coming not through your hands for the sculpture, but now for the book. But also Sri Aurobindo speaks about where he had a period, I think about 6 months, where he had this perception that his sadhana was completely stuck and nothing was happening. 6 months is a lot for the sadhana.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and but this is, I think it's something, the energy, that goes down and works in our subconscious, unconscious, and that we don't perceive it directly, nothing of it, because it's so deep down, but it is there and doing its jobs in one way or another. Or the other interpretation, which seemed to be your interpretation, which is quite also this, not in contradiction, but that perhaps there are times for something, at times for something else. Previously it was the sculpture, doing arts, and so now it's about writing your book. And I like also very much how you said that we should not be afraid of different sources, but I would say also of different activities. That's the point. No?
Yeah.
We live in
Right.
we live nowadays in a
Thank you.
society. Yeah. But that's a quality that we need dramatically. Different sources means also to be able to absorb. I don't like the word absorb, and nothing else comes to my mind now. To absorb something from someone, from a teacher, a master, where perhaps we don't necessarily agree on everything, and we don't like it completely, and or some teaching, or some culture, or some music, or some arts, or science, or whatever, and we are able to capture the baby and throw out the dirty bathwater. And that's what we absolutely need, because I know, for example,
Yes.
you cited Sri Ramana Maharshi. No? He's in a certain sense, he is the antipode of Sri Aurobindo, no? But he was nevertheless a great master. And I remember I went first through the traditional yogas, the more jnana yoga, and I appreciated. I had, for me, Ramana Maharshi was really a great master for me.
For sure. Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
If I would approach him today, there was this mind. Oh, but we are superior to this Advaitic Vedantic yogas. We go beyond that. No, this instinct would come in probably, but we should be this integrative impulse. That's something that we are missing in our society.
Yes.
And I use a good old saying of Hegel, who said, make a thesis, but then also an antithesis, and then make the synthesis. The contraries. Here we are again at the contraries. Yeah. Perhaps for me, at least, the last question then would be, you mentioned your book. What is it now about your book? What is now this creative impulse, integrative and creative impulse that is going towards probably a lot of paper, I suppose. And
digital paper at the moment, but yes.
Okay, I suppose. But nowadays it's easy to make it both versions. No, so it should not be.
That's right.
What is it? Is it about? Can you tell us about your book?
So it's on Mira Alfasa, and it's especially for the audience is the academic community, because nothing has been written on her for the academic community. There have been books, of course, written by devotees about the mother, biographies of her, or books about her teaching that are from devotees for devotees. But in terms of scholars, they tend to dismiss her, ignore her, think of her as a deviation from Sri Aurobindo's teachings. So, I mean, you know, I kind of go through that scholarship in the introduction to say, you know, she has been, you know, just not remembered, not understood. And I think that's a crucial problem, because we don't understand Aurobindo if we don't understand her. And that's been my experience. But I think it's also the experience of some who are sympathetic, who are not followers of Aurobindo and the mother, but they're noticing that she's been ignored, and we need to study her. And of course, I mean, I'm coming at it from a personal perspective of her having been so crucial for my own creative process, my own sadhana, my own practice. But then I'm also a scholar, and I'm trying to also be integral in the sense of unite the devotee practitioner with the you know, academic scholarship. And to be a scholar practitioner is what I am, and what, you know, Jonathan, you are too. I can, you know, we've talked, well, with Debashish Banerjee is that, and many of the kind of heroes of mine that I study are scholar practitioners. And so this is my kind of first way, my first creation of a scholarship, of a book of scholarship that's from a scholar practitioner perspective. And so I'm just going to introduce her, you know, to the world from a scholarship perspective. And I've done that by talking about her life, her relationship. What is the relationship between her and Aurobindo? How would you characterize that? Is her teaching different, or is it the same as Aurobindo's? If it's different, how does it differ? Is there any way in which her teaching might be resonant with other traditions? And at the third part of the book, I'll talk about that in terms of Meher Baba and Sufism, because there's a history there that is going to be interesting to talk about. But I'm kind of, the structure of the book is based on Aurobindo's book, The Mother, and how he talked about the 4 personalities, powers of the mother. And each one of those 4, it's also taking my dissertation. My dissertation is becoming this book. But in my dissertation, I studied the Aurobindo and the mother's aesthetic theory, and talked about, you know, the way in which they use the arts for their own sadhana, and how they taught that for their students. And at the end, I sort of teased out 4 or 5 different themes that I thought were important. And I was amazed by the fact that those 4 or 5 themes matched perfectly the 4 personalities of the Divine Mother. And as I went back and reread it, and I thought, well, what if I did a book that was just about those 4 themes? And then what if I just did a book that was about the mother, about those 4 things? So that's kind of what it's been about. So I'm kind of, the first part is about introducing who is Sri Aurobindo, what is his teaching, how is he, and what were the influences on his life. The same thing, the second chapter will be who is Mira Alfasa, you know, what was her experience in Paris, and what was the experience, you know, influences on her life there. What is their vision of the new being? That's the third chapter. And then the second part of the book is those 4 personalities, and how her teaching and her experience exhibits those and demonstrates those 4, how I interpret those 4 themes. Then the third part is, how does her teaching relate to other teachers in the 20th century, both within India and outside of India. And I'm going to focus on women and men, but mainly women, and also Sufism, because I'm a Sufi and want to kind of talk about those things too. So that's kind of the structure.
Sounds fascinating. Really, I think you've opened up a whole new realm of questions for me that we'll have to wait for our next podcast. When are you expecting to have this book done, roughly? I mean,
yes,
so our listeners can know.
Yeah, I'm hoping it next spring. We'll see. I need to get in touch with my editor. Jeffrey Long is the editor of this series of, he's a wonderful scholar. He's a fellow of Sri Ramakrishna Sharada Devi, and he's a teacher of Hinduism and Jainism in Pennsylvania here. And anyway, I need to get in touch with him about that. And he's got a series called Indic Traditions Philosophy, Theology, and Ethics, I think is the kind of the name of the series through Lexington Press that it's a part of. So we'll see, hopefully next spring.
Beautiful.
So the academic audience, it would be people who make interreligious studies, or what kind of faculties are they?
Yeah, the discipline of religious studies, theology,
theology,
just broadly speaking. So yeah, interreligious would be a part of that for sure.
Yeah.
But religious studies and theology.
I think we need that, because still today there is still this separation, I think, in the minds.
Yes.
With the information is all over the place, but I see that people are stuck on this, on that category. So it would be nice to have also this cross-fertilization. Patrick, can you eventually, if you like, if you want, leave also a contact to someone who wants to contact? Do you have a website eventually? I don't know.
I do, yeah. In fact, you could contact, my email is there, but it's reunionstudios.com.
Okay.
And it's my website for my artwork, but there's also a place there to contact me.
Okay.
As well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and on that website, we were speaking about the new being specifically, but there's beautiful pictures up there. If our listeners want to, I recommend going and seeing that.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful website.
Thank you.
So I think we've come to a natural conclusion and also natural opening for our next time, because I really would love to do this again. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Marco, for co-hosting, and thank you so much, Patrick, for taking time to be with us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Jonathan. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.